universities not sure if their programs are going to continue. Now, universities, let's think about them. They have been one of the main ways that we've increased the ability, the capability of Americans, right? Our workforce has flourished because we've had university preparation. People have spent some time, spending time doing things sometimes that they didn't like as they sat through courses. But that's good preparation for life. Now, the thing that I really like about our approach is many, many times you may get like 130 different ways to handle things, 130 different lessons. Lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3. And what do we know about learning? If you have too many things thrown at you, you may not learn very well at all. You may not master the material. And for teachers, if they're teaching 130 different lessons related to social emotional development, they may not have time to embed all those things into their teaching. They may not have time to make sure that they're really reaching the students, and particularly the students who are the outliers, who most need the information.
What if you turn hardship into greatness, anger into serenity? Everything changes. Make your life a masterpiece.
I'm Dr. Christine Mason, here today with my friend Yanik, and we are starting a series. And this series is based on work that we've done at the Center for Educational Improvement since like 2010. So that's quite a long time. And what we are going to do is very innovative. What we're going to do is take the principles of things we've done at the Center for Educational Improvement and the hundreds of people we've worked with over the last 15, 20 years, and we're going to apply them or help you apply them to life in general. Okay? We know there's a lot of conflict going on right now. Look around you. Currently, millions of global bystanders are just waiting with an increasing sense of doom, wondering what's going to happen next, right? Many feel that the guardrails of democracy are being torn down. We're concerned about national security, about health, about vaccines, right? About global aid. There have been many, many compassionate actions of the U.S. Think about USAID and how we've helped so many people in developing countries. Think about programs addressing poverty in the U.S. These programs have been around a long time. They've done a lot of good for millions of people. And all of a sudden, they're being defunded. Now, what's going on and what can we do? Recently, such authors as John Mills, a professor in the UK, who's written the book, The End of the World. Listen to that, The End of the World, The Fate of Civilization. And he speaks about global climate changes, about politics, about so many things that are in a process of upheaval. There are also Harvard professors, Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt, who write in How Democracies Die. This is the book, okay? And also in the book, The Tyranny of the Minority. And in that book, they say that if you look at the system of government in the U.S., the way we set things up with our electoral college and with the Senate, there can be major decisions made based on the voice of a minority of voters. Okay? And that can have profound implications for what's going on. Another book that really I'm basing a lot of our work on is by Yale professor Timothy Snyder. And he has a recent book, Tyranny, 20 Lessons for the 20th Century. All of these books, okay, call up the signs of a democracy that's failing and related lessons looking at other countries in the history, what's going on. Just to give you one example, this is again from the How Democracies Die book. And the quote is, even presidents who scorned the media in private in the past treated it with a certain minimum of respect and civility in public. And we're seeing some of that disappear. And of course, there is disagreement. Some people felt they were left out of the equation, right? That we had the elite, the intellectuals who were doing well, and that the working class, middle class people just weren't, receiving attention, receiving what they needed. We had people that prior to this last election felt like, wow, prices are rising. I don't know what to do. However, we don't need books to tell us there are problems. There are an abundant signs of the problems with our democracy. There are convictions right now without due process. Immigrants being sent to countries, even when the Supreme Court says, halt, you can't do that. They're still being sent. We're also halting programs that enhance the lives of people who've historically been disenfranchised, including dismantling many DEI programs. So we were doing things to address slavery and the problems that have been incurred by families who've historically been enslaved and intergenerational trauma. And some think we went too far. And so now the pendulum is swinging back. What else is happening? Well, hundreds of people, federal employees, have lost their jobs. So I live in Virginia, right outside of DC, Northern Virginia, and we're seeing people who've had secure government jobs have really, in some ways, been dedicated civil servants doing their work for their country for decades. All of a sudden, losing jobs without due process, without notice, and sometimes with letters that are demeaning, saying that they've had poor job performance. What? We've had universities that are being stripped of funding. I had a grant, and it was one of the ones that was defunded. We were working with Yale University, and we had a program to address compassion in school leaders. We did have a DEI component. It was a part of what we were doing. And we were going around the country implementing programs to help make sure that leaders in schools thought about what kids have gone through. And we could think about COVID and all the trauma that occurred during COVID. There was a need for those grants. We were in our last few months, about 8 months left of the project. That's where you complete your research and you write up your results. So, if somebody thinks there's a waste of government money, the waste would probably be not to allow us to complete our research and to publish our results. There had already been a federal investment. Now that's the point where we give back and we publish results. That is the way the scientific process works. So we're one of hundreds of grantees who've lost funding. We see also things like reduction in programs to monitor the health and well-being of people in our country. We see efforts to reduce the number of vaccines available. We don't know what the impact of all this is going to be. Recently, I read that like the COVID vaccines, which have worked pretty well, although some people say they're not needed. But I'm over 60 and I look at this and say, I need the vaccine. It served me well. During COVID, I think I got COVID twice. Once early on, when in fact there wasn't adequate information early about COVID, and once when Omicron came out. Remember that? Those days, the new version, right? And I was so relieved when the new vaccine came. Well, recently, what did I hear? It may be available only to the elderly and those who have compromised immune systems. What? We don't know what the impact's going to be. We do know that measles are on the uptake in the US. We do know that the polio vaccine has been highly effective across the globe for decades. And we don't know what's going to happen if someone says we don't need to make that available. We're very, very concerned. We also know, if we look at what's happened recently, and of course, some of this, I have to say, is in the name of reducing the federal deficit. Now, that's a huge problem. Trillions of dollars of deficit. Yes, it does need to be reduced. I'm 100% for doing what we can to eliminate some of the waste and realize that some programs may be the nice but not essential programs and reduce the deficit. But there's a way to go about it, a way that honors the dignity of the individual and the dignity of programs that have had relationships with the federal government and with each other for a long, long time. But we've had the ousting of directors who have knowledge. So when our national security directors are ousted and replaced with people who have very little experience, same thing happening in the Department of Defense, and you go on and on, we have a brain drain. And we know that other countries are taking advantage of some of our people with expertise, people at universities that have lost funding. And then we can keep going on, but you can imagine thousands of students at universities not sure if their programs are going to continue. Now, universities, let's think about them. They have been one of the main ways that we've increased the ability, the capability of Americans, right? Our workforce has flourished because we've had university preparation. People have spending time doing things sometimes that they didn't like as they sat through courses. But that's good preparation for life. You have to say, with almost any job, there'll come a time when you won't like what you're doing. There will be a part of your job where you hang in there, you get through it. Not everything's rosy, right? And I think one of the jobs of a university is to help someone go through that process of maturing, where in fact they learn about things that may not be their number one passion. I think there's a huge need for that. Also, a huge need for the graduate research, right? Research professors who can count on graduate research assistants to help them. Now, at my little Center for Educational Improvement, we've had research assistants, either interns or research assistants, since about 2010. And we've had between 5 and 10, sometimes up to 14 research assistants working with us on various projects. A huge help. We would not have been able to accomplish what we have without those research assistants. I also look at this partly as my way of giving back because I've been able to mentor students at a distance. We talk through things. They gravitate towards us because what we do with heart-centered learning, which we'll get to in a few minutes, resonates with them. They think, wow, this is important, valuable information. And they love the fact that they can meet with us. They can meet virtually with other research assistants. So we have people from across the United States, Canada, Scotland, Turkey, England, India, various countries around the world who come to us and work together. And that global family is important. So we can think about students globally now who now are at risk of being dismissed from programs. Where do they go? If you're in the middle of a graduate program and you think you want to study to become a scientist of some sort, for example, and now somebody's saying your program is closing, what do you do? Where do you go? So there is a lot of chaos right now, a lot of concerns. And then, of course, we can look at USAID. I think some of the golden rule. I was raised with those values. Do unto others as you would like them to do unto you. Think about it. So if you're in a position where you can give to others, is it good to try to do that? Or should you just keep everything to yourself and not be worried and concerned about others? Be dismissive. So there are many, many of us who are concerned. The list goes on and on. So I begin by telling you, it's a very troubling time for many. And I'm sure there are others, and Yanik and I will get to this soon, who have a different perspective. They may say, phew, it's It's about time someone paid attention to my needs. And there may be people who feel like there is waste, graft, corruption here in DC. And I have to tell you, there has been some. There is some in almost any program. I've worked overseas in India, for example, and we know there have been programs in many developing countries where you go in and bribes are the way of working within that country. You don't want to do it. There are ways to minimize it, but it happens. What I saw with Department of Education working overseas with India was a huge respect for each culture. And what we did is that we brought some of our knowledge and expertise to India and we learned from them. There was a giving back. And we also talked to people in that country. We didn't just say, here's our money, our funds, do it this way. We said, hey, this is what we've been doing. Now let's think about your needs. Let's assess them together and then come up with a program that works for you, that's tailored to your country and your culture. Very respectful of different cultures. And the programs I worked with, we didn't see bribes. What we saw was people banding together to try to get jobs done. So, very concerned when a hatchet is taken to programs that have been around a long time. Okay, deep breath, a couple deep breaths. And I want to just say, as we go on, there may be times where we talk about things that are troubling to you. You may feel a sense of dis-ease or discomfort. And I want you to take some deep breaths. And I'm going to help you. Even when we do our meditations, you may feel some of that. And if that happens, I want you to take deep breaths and let go. Okay, I'm going to try to help guide you so that, in fact, your sense of being uncomfortable isn't too great. But we also know from some research that to make gains, to move forward, sometimes you have to get out of your comfort zone. If you're strictly staying where you're comfortable, you may not be doing what's needed to help address major, major issues. Okay. So since 2009, CEI, my company, Center for Educational Improvement, has been dedicated particularly to working with children in schools, to think particularly about children who have experienced trauma. And we know those numbers are huge. By the age of 4, 1/4 of our children will have experienced some trauma, some significant trauma, whether it's divorce, death of a grandparent, abuse, sexual abuse, neglect. It's there. It's happening. And partly because adults are not always good parents. We don't always learn how to be a good parent. It's not one of those things that always comes naturally. And we know if you have been raised by a parent who didn't know much about what to do, who experienced abuse themselves, who perhaps had parents who were neglectful, then you may be second guessing what to do. And it's hard. And you may have this voice that runs through your head that says, oh, got to do it this way. And then a counter voice that says, oh, no, that's not right. And then you get confused and you confuse your children. Children come to us in schools with these backgrounds. That means in a class of 20, at any point, there may be 4 to 5 students who are not with you. They're not hanging on your every word. They're not immediately obedient, doing the task at hand. They may be hyper alert. And we know this from the brain science, the neuroscience. The 1/4 of these students may have things happening in their minds, in their brains that interfere with their learning. It means that they're not readily present and available to learn. But we know we can handle that. Isn't that amazing? There is research that says that some things as simple as breathing or movement can help orient kids towards learning. So what we're going to do in the course of a series that'll run over several months is Yanik and I are going to talk. And we may even invite you to talk with us sometimes or share your feedback and ponder your questions. And we're going to say, what do we do? Knowing that we have a formula that has worked in schools, okay? And you can look at mindfulness, you can look at social emotional learning, you can look at heart-centered learning, which we'll tell you about particularly next week, it'll be a huge focus on that during our next session. We can take what we've learned from working in schools and classrooms and apply it to life in general. In fact, what I'm doing is I'm starting to go through a series of interviews with people who've been with me on this heart-centered learning path over a number of years. And I'm going to ask them how they apply it to their own lives. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own experiences and how, over a period of time, I have done these double checks with myself. Am I being heart-centered? Where is my consciousness? Where is my compassion? And I've learned to reframe my life, my situation, based on some very, very simple principles that are pretty easy to follow. Now, the thing that I really like about our approach is many, many times you may get like 130 different ways to handle things, 130 different lessons. Lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3. And what do we know about learning? If you have too many things thrown at you, you may not learn very well at all. You may not master the material. And for teachers, if they're teaching 130 different lessons related to social emotional development, they may not have time to embed all those things into their teaching. They may not have time to make sure that they're really reaching the students, and particularly the students who are the outliers, who most need the information. We also know that we don't have enough counselors and psychologists available to help all the kids that have needs. So, again, what we're going to do is apply the principles we've learned with schools, with teachers, with leaders. The program I had with Yale that was defunded was the Compassionate School Leadership Academy, developing compassionate school leaders. Okay. So we focus on leadership as well as teachers, well as ancillary staff, psychologists, social workers, all these people working together, along with the staff that help the schools run, the janitors, the secretaries, and the parents. Compassionate, heart-centered learning works for everyone. We're going to help you take these principles, these guidelines from schools and bring them out to your life. We're going to talk about how we apply them in our lives and the difference it's made. And we'll show you how you can do it too. But before I get into an exercise that will really show you what to do, I want to talk with Yanik a little bit about our perception of what's going on right now and the whole concept that we sometimes have differing views and what to do with all these differing viewpoints, because that is a huge need. There is polarization right now, and we know we need to find a way to bridge our differences.
So much, Dr. Mason, and I just want to quickly say something that I'm extremely pleased and honored that we start really working with one another closely, because Dr. Chris Mason is really the pioneer of really the mother of educational mindfulness. That's really who you are, and your work has tremendously impacted myself, my students, but really the world, because it's so powerful. And I also love how you deal with the whole situation, because you are solution oriented all the time, because the stakes are high, especially right now for you and most Americans, right? And so therefore I'm even more grateful to you that you actually take the time to do this, because this will be a game changer. I don't have any doubt it will be a game changer for students, teachers, and any folks of any walk of life, really, because it will be tangible, it will be actionable, and it will be impactful on an individual but also on a collective level. So therefore, thank you so much, Dr. Chris Mason, to be here and really start this amazing collaboration, because in my mind, a real partnership, a real collaboration, ultimately, my vision is always decades, so 12, 24 years, really, so we can really build something that is truly life-changing and uplifting, really, across the board. There are no boundaries in this regard. So thank you again for your time and for your incredible heart and intellectual capacity that you bring really to the table, and really that you are the gift that we need to myself, but really to the world. So therefore, so let's just start, as you just said, a little bit, lay the groundwork of what we are actually talking about and why we have different perspectives, right? Occasionally we might have different perspective. Why? Because we simply have literally a different perspective, right? I can never ever really truly see what you see, not just because you grew up in a different time, but also in a different culture and in a different area, but also you have different values that ultimately inform your perception, right? And ultimately it's the values that inform our perception. In other words, we always see reality through the lens of our values that informs our perception. Therefore, we never ever truly see the same thing, even though we might look at the same thing.
So, thank you, Yanik. And I want to reflect for a moment with you on a couple things we talked about previously as we were preparing. We talked about how when we look at the world today, we have many viewpoints. And you were saying that sometimes, even with our different viewpoints, people will have some similarities. There are views that they share. So you might find that like 90% of views over here and 90% of another person's over at another point. But maybe you've got that 10% place of agreement, right? And so we first want to help find those places and to acknowledge them. And actually, in some of the books I've read, they said historically, when democracies have worked, people have found those points of agreement. They seek them out. They know it's important to acknowledge them, to show and honor and respect the others by tuning into those agreements. And then also to have what they call forbearance. And this is what Levitsky and his colleague talk about. Forbearance and some tolerance when the other side doesn't quite get it. They do something else. Historically, when democracies have worked, when the other side does something that just seems unbearable, we try to have some forgiveness. We try to figure out how to negotiate and what can be done. In a heart-centered way of looking at the world, this would be our consciousness. We would say, oh, we are aware of the tremendous differences. We may not like it, but still there's something to honor in the other. And I will just take the example of legislators. And you think about what it takes to become one. You get the support from hundreds of people. Usually you're studied to become a politician, right? You know something about laws. You've put some effort behind it. And you probably have some good ideas, even if not all of them are good, right? So people bring that experience to their work, and we should honor that. They should. And say, okay, colleague, what do we do? We've got a barrier here. And where's the greater good? So one of the things with a heart-centered approach is we want a community where we're thinking constantly of the greater good. Now, in our society, Western society, many, many times we focus on the individual. We say, oh, I've got to get ahead. What am I going to do? What's my path? How are my dividends doing, right? Where's my stock? Guess what? If you focus too much on yourself, sometimes you end up in this big trap. And the trap is when something unpleasant happens, you just absorb that unpleasantness too. And you end up sometimes being isolated. And would you believe it the happiest people, there's some research on this, give back to others. So if you're in a place where you're feeling dissatisfied, you're feeling hurt, one of the best things you can do is to help someone else. Golden rule again, right? And we don't always go there. We don't have schools that automatically help us gravitate to that. We don't have political institutions that automatically help us do that. We may have a sense of, let's make sure that my colleagues, my peers, the people that in my bubble are provided for. Well, that's good, except it's one world. And there is an interconnectivity of all things. The land masses, the sea, the air, all interconnected. And of course, in this digital age with rapid communication, we are even more connected. And part of the problem, I think, is we're so connected to this big outside world, then our retreat is to do too much on our own, particularly with our gadgets, right? And not spend enough time in community. One of the books I read recently said, if we really want to help shape communities of diverse interests, means we have to get out there. And you have to be actually in a room with people or on the street together, chatting. And as you chat with others, you have just a common conversation. Many times you learn things of interest and things that will touch your heart. You may learn that someone has had a tragedy in their lives. Maybe they've recently lost a loved one. And usually our hearts will be filled with empathy when we hear that, right? And that helps you look at a person a little differently. Then you could just say, oh, you're rude, you cut in line. Well, maybe someone really is trying to meet this timeline that they have limited time to do their shopping. And they've got to get back home and they don't have sitters. You know, you can think about all the reasons that someone may appear to be rude. And you can go to the place of attacking a person, staying with the rudeness, or you can give them a little grace, a little benefit of the doubt. And again, some of the reading I've done about democracies and how to help them prevail is to realize that we give each other a sense of grace. And we say, we believe you mean well. And think about your heart and mind. When you believe that person next to you is meaning well, that they're not doing something out of a sense of hatred, but they're doing something from their sense of how things should be, you can forgive them a bit easier. It's a little easier to say, oh, what do we do now? So that sense of consciousness, just awareness of differences. And, you know, I gave you a lot of my lens when I started the course today, and the things I'm seeing and hearing that really are deep, deep concern for me. But we could do surveys and find that other people may have other things at the top of their list. And that would be a good thing to do. Find out what those lists are like, right? You know, as a scientist, I would say, yeah, you'd look at the data and you say, okay, what do we do? Where are our common interests? And I believe one of them now, which has been made so clear in the last few months, is that we've got a huge deficit. We need to reduce government spending. And that's hard to do. That's not easy. We all agree to that. However, I believe there's a way to do it with concern for the dignity and respect for all people. And so instead of pushing and shoving, we're taking this approach of how do we do this in a way that will help you, even as we go through this really tough period of time, and will gain your sense of, I understand it. Even if it's tough for me, I'll go through this for my country. My country, our country, right? So Yanik, do we want to do any more talking or should I go?
I think that's fantastic. I would just quickly illustrate, you know, in terms of the common ground that we are basically addressing. That is so important. And then we go to your exercise because you had a couple of important points that I just want to kind of pick up. One is that we have to lean in. When we don't agree with someone, we should not go further away, but we should actually go closer to this person and actually truly explore what the person makes. What is it that the person really needs that is somehow lacking? Because as you were illustrating as well, in terms of students, if they misbehave, that's simply the most obvious way for them to communicate things that they cannot put yet in words. And so is it with adults, right? If we somehow freak out or whatever, there's something in our tacit knowledge, deeply in our unconscious, that really comes to the very fore. In other words, it's something that we see in someone else that ultimately makes us react in a way that is probably not appropriate, but it is a sign, and it's the very, very onset of a potential transformation. And therefore, this time, in my view, is actually ultimately we will look back. I know I'm always an optimist, but I think it's also it's just the best way to deal with reality, I think, because as you know very well, if you are positive in your mind, automatically it opens up your mind, right? Whereas if you are negative, it narrows it down, right? In other words, I remember still vividly when I fell in love. Everything was beautiful. Everything, I was just walking to people, everything is beautiful. Well, what happens if you had like a breakup? The opposite, right? You narrow completely down. And that's why it is so important. That's why I think to be truly alive, you have to be able to cultivate a certain state of mind. And that's what we are really going to do with you. And you will really illustrate how to do it through heart-centered learning. And now just a quick illustration so people have an idea what we are actually talking about. And I think that's really important. So there are always two people. There are always two people. They always have different opinions. These are the views, okay? We simply also, really realistically speaking, I can never ever put myself into Chris Mason's shoes. It's impossible, even though I'm just next to her. Why? Because, as we just alluded to, we have different values, different cultural background. Therefore, the reality, the objective reality that we see is still not 100% the same. Because Chris Mason, she's a scientist, and I might be a student. So therefore, she already has different glasses because she looks probably at the situation through a physics lens, and I myself look at it through a teacher's lens, for example, okay? So therefore, that's already unrealistic. Then we have the common interest, okay? We want to live in peace and so on. And here, most importantly, we have the human identity needs. That's the same for everyone. It doesn't matter which culture you're from. However, of course, it differs in the way we live it. In other words, as a Swiss, you might celebrate cheese day or whatever. I'm just making something up. On the other hand, as an American, you might celebrate whatever, or you might do fishing, and I might do, whatever. Okay, so that's the thing. These human identity needs, they're the same. This is one you can tell is security. We have all a need for security. We have all a need for belongingness, connectedness, right? That makes us human. And then we have all a need for recognition, basic human rights. So in other words, the worst thing that you can actually do to a person is to ignore the person, right? That's why it's also really important that you acknowledge also a homeless person, because that's the worst thing if you don't even acknowledge him and look him in the eyes. This is really, really, really important. And then we have the sense of action, which ultimately puts these all together. That's a sense of being alive, our creativity, and all this together, ultimately, it's making and seeking meaning. It gives us life, okay? So this is just a little bit what we are trying to do. And then ultimately, we have to ask ourselves always, what do we focus on? So what is our focus, okay? In a discussion, for example, we have to be clear, okay, what's our focus? Is our focus on only the negative? That doesn't mean that we should not address the negative. But is it the sole objective, or is it potentially our focus is to look at the negative and see the gift, the hidden gift? Because every gift comes disguised, okay? And then we have the meaning, okay, what meaning do we want to give? Meaning, okay? And then ultimately we have the action. So that's what we want to come away with you together, to have something tangible that you can implement immediately and incrementally. Because if we want to leap from one day to the other in a big step, we won't be successful, because we have to be able to integrate it into our daily life. It's like a drug addict, okay? If you're addicted to drugs, for example, you have to replace the addiction with a different habit, right? And so that's very similar what we are doing here, okay? So this is just quickly to a little bit illustrating what we are actually up to. So now back to you, Dr. Mason. Thank you so much.
Yanik, thank you for that. And I want to remind our audience that over the next few weeks and months, we are going to be talking about these issues. And there may be some things that we talk about, and even some meditations, some guided meditations that we do that may be uncomfortable. We will give you guidelines in our next sessions about how to handle that dis-ease or discomfort. But I want you to be prepared for it, because it's not all easy, okay? This work of bringing compassion to schools, to the earth, to this globe, is difficult work. And it requires right now, with everything we are going through, with so much violence and chaos and so many needs and so many things where, in fact, I think we've walked away from our true nature. We've walked away from nature. With all these things going on, it's going to require some diligence. And as I was taught, I'm also a yoga teacher. And as I was trained as a yoga teacher, I was trained to get up every morning and do yoga, whether I felt like it or not. That I was to really get my body in motion, let my pathways open so I could get the energy flowing in my body to breathe and to meditate. And I've done that. I take a few days off here and there, admittedly, but not many. Most days it's 20 to 40 to 60 minutes of yoga and meditation in the morning. Now, you can do it any time. I do it in the morning because it sets my day. Of course, I'm also a morning person, so, makes it easier for me. But you could pick your time. But there is something to the discipline, to being consistent. And what I learned early on was give it 40 days. So let's say I'm going to teach you some breath work today. And these tapes will be available so that you can check back later if you need to for these exercises in particular. But let's say you decide to do these very simple things for 40 days. At some point, you may start to be bored. Keep going. At some point, you may say, I'm rushed. Well, do less if you need to, but keep at it. At some point, your mind is going to say, I need more. Well, we will give more to you in our next session. I want to really ground you with some things that many of you know about. And as a bonus today, because I've been doing this with my yoga class recently, and I love the way it feels, I'm going to give you a couple other things that most of you probably have not experienced, okay? And I just want you to see what happens. Okay, so with that little prelude, this is going to be fairly short. And what we do is we start with a way of getting you centered. So you might have your feet on the ground. You can be seated on the ground or in a chair, straight spine, right? As a yoga teacher, I have what is called Jnana Mudra. You're bringing your thumb and your index finger together. That's knowledge and wisdom that come together in the yogic terms. And I rest these in my lap. Okay? Other fingers are together, hands on my lap. No, you don't have to do that, but I like the sense of what happens with that. You take some deep breaths, and you can either close your eyes or lower your gaze. You know, some of us are more comfortable with just a lowered gaze. If you close your eyes, what I've been taught to do, which I love, is to focus really on the center of my forehead. And we do this, and this is a little science. The pituitary and pineal glands, which are master glands in the brain, are kind of right behind where the center of the forehead is. So you can increase the energy to those glands by focusing there. So as you do this, you can just sense your sense of well-being, your feet on the ground, your spine being stretched up, tucking your chin back slightly so the back of your head is straight with your spine. And again, taking some deep breaths. Now, as you breathe, I want you to consciously expand your abs. So on the inhale, expanding your abdomen, blowing it up almost like a balloon. Then hold the breath. And on the exhale, bring the navel point back to the spine, holding your breath out. And you can even think about this as like a 4-4-4 breath. Inhaling to 4, suspending the breath for a count of 4, exhaling for 4, and holding the breath out. And we're just going to do this for, maybe a minute here, kind of at your own pace, trying to make sure you're really expanding the abs, starting with the inhale and continuing. And finish your breath cycle and open your eyes. Things we usually notice with this. One, if you're paying attention to your breath this way, it's really hard to think about anything else. And that's amazing because, our minds love to chatter. There's always this voice going on. What are you saying? What are you hearing? Oh, I observe this. And there's such a profound peace and quiet with this. And I like to think about it as the mind being crammed full of stuff, right? And all these networks going on and on. And now we breathe. And you get the breath into the body, right? And you have this sense of relief. So that is good. So I would urge you to practice, maybe for 2 minutes a day, this deep breathing. And then you can check to see, you can keep your eyes closed if you want to for like 30 seconds longer. Gee, how do I feel? Right. Okay, so that's part 1. Now the bonus for today. And if you have a nose that's stuffed up for some reason, you've got congestion, it may not be the best time to practice, but you can blow your nose first and then try it. It's alternate nostril breathing. Now, it's kind of amazing. and I'm not quite sure of all the science, but it seems to work. And this is the way it goes. If, in fact, you're plugging the right nostril, the right thumb, and you're breathing through the left nostril, you're likely to feel more relaxed. So before I teach you this per se, I just want you to close your eyes and practice breathing just through the left nostril. And you can inhale and exhale, put your hand down. Now, if you're like me, you're starting to feel like, oh my God, I could almost go to sleep. You feel so relaxed. Now, it's fascinating. The theory goes that the breath really starts at the base of the spine. And to do the breathing through the left nostril, you're going to start at the left side of the spine, spiral up, end up at the right nostril, and then go to the right hemisphere of the brain. So the creative side of your brain, that creative hemisphere, relates to left nostril breathing and being relaxed. Okay, we're going to try the other side. We're going to try the right nostril breathing. So you're plugging the left nostril, just breathing through the right. And inhale, relax down. Now, for me, I feel a little edgy with this. I don't feel as completely relaxed. It's hard to get a nice sigh of relief with this. But I feel a little more alert. And many times when we teach this in class, we'll do the left first just to get people feeling really good. And then you do the right nostril breathing because you want people to be alert and ready to absorb whatever it is that's being taught. So as a classroom teacher, I could go ahead and use these techniques with my students. If I'm feeling that they're just lethargic, I would do right nostril breathing, locking the left nostril. If I feel like they're just too active, I need to calm things down, you would do left nostril breathing. Now, does this work with adults too? Yes, it does. I mainly teach adult students when I teach yoga, and this is one of the primary breaths we teach. Before we end today, I want to give you the new thing we've worked on. It's very quick. This will take about 2 minutes, and then we'll be done with our session, at least in terms of the exercises today. Okay, so this is based on the premises of right and left nostril breathing, knowing that when you block the right nostril, you're going to be relaxed. You're inhaling, exhaling through the left. When you block the left, you're doing right nostril breathing, you're going to feel more energized, alert. Okay, the new thing, and it may be challenging for some of you, you may not get to 26. We're going to try to inhale 26 times in little sniffs through first the left nostril, okay? When you get to 26, I'll tell you to inhale. When I get to my 26, I'll say inhale. If you run out of breath before, then that's fine. Just relax, but try to do it. So 26 little sniffs through the left nostril, followed by one long exhale. We're blocking the right nostril, closing your eyes or lowering your gaze, and 26, okay? When you get to your 26, relax your hand. And for me, what I can tell you is when I reach 26, I feel a sense of, wow, life feels pretty good. You know, kind of like the way I look around and I sense just a different sense of being right in this space, same space, little different me, right? Now we'll do the other side. We're blocking the left nostril, 26. They're just short little sniffs through the right nostril. Okay, close your eyes, lower your gaze, and go. When I reach 26, I open my hand and open my eyes. And now I feel a little balanced. And what our book says is this will help to balance the blood chemistry and help with your sense of physical and mental, emotional well-being. Okay, so 3 little exercises to do. You can do the right and left nostril breathing. You can do the deep breathing through the abs. And then you can do the 26, right? The sniffs. Try these and see how you feel. And remember to give yourself some time to practice, right? Talk about discipline. It's going to be important to what we do together. This sense of, I'm going to try to do it consistently. If you skip a day here and there, okay, but try to do it every day if you can. Okay, and that is our session for today. Session 1, and we've got more to come. Yanik, thank you.
Beautiful. Dr. Chris Mason. That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.the-ykm.com. Meant to make you grow.